Have you ever pondered what might occur if you could hear your own future call for assistance? For Emily, an emergency call operator, this concept might seem like something from a science fiction film, but it would soon become a scary reality. The operations room's lights flickered softly, and the monotonous sound of the switchboard echoed like any other night. Emily, who was always duty-driven, had no idea that this night would drive her to the verge of insanity. She had no idea that she was going to get a terrifying prophecy of her own destiny when she answered the phone for the first time. She was confused by the voice on the telephone, which was hers but warped by fear and desperation. As the operator, she had to assist with this emergency call, but things were starting to feel unreal. As the hours went by, the calls continued, each one more sinister and darker than the last, and the line separating time and space seemed to dissolve, trapping Emily in a never-ending nightmare. Her own cry for assistance echoed in her ears as though a ghost from the future was attempting to speak to her. She made an effort to remain composed and steer the conversation in the direction of help, but every time she heard her own voice begging for help, a pang of terror gripped her heart. During those endless hours, fear became her constant companion as she sought answers, spoke with her colleagues, but no one could understand. And as the clock continued to tick away and the shadow of death loomed closer, the calls continued, becoming more vivid and unsettling. She wondered if what she was going through was a warning, a way for life or fate to warn her of an impending danger. She sat at the console, her hands shaking by the phone, waiting anxiously for the next call, wondering if she could change her destiny. Could the unavoidable be avoided? In a desperate moment, she made the decision to act. Emily started looking into the numbers that were making the calls. It seemed as though she was being pulled more into the abyss with every try and every number she dialed. The numbers she discovered belonged to other operators in other places. Every call seemed to be a clue that led her to an incomprehensible conclusion, as though she were caught in a maze of time. Her thoughts was filled with eerie visions and sinister predictions as the night became darker. Time was passing her by. Every call was a reflection of a future that seemed more and more like a curse. She felt compelled to share her disturbing experience amidst the chaos. In search of answers, she reached out to a group of paranormal phenomenon researchers. They discussed the possibility of her moving down her own timeline, parallel dimensions, and the possibility that time might be a flexible term. But as she listened, her uncertainty grew. Every notion they offered seemed to simply make her already intolerable fear worse. Her gut, however, prompted her to press on, since these calls were part of something bigger. The operator inside her held on to the hope that she would be able to alter her fate. The stress was evident as the hours went by. Emily's heart would stop every time the phone rang, and she could feel the air becoming heavy and oppressive. She was aware that her own voice, her own cries for assistance, would soon be heard, and so it was. The subsequent call was a clear prophecy of her demise rather than merely a warning. She heard an intruder's footsteps, a cruel chuckle, and an unidentified sound that made her blood freeze over the phone. She became aware that she was not alone at that point. Someone or something was pursuing her, and each call served as a reminder of what lay ahead in her quest for safety. Her co-workers were gathered in the break area, so she went there. She described her ordeal, attempting to make clear the gravity of her predicament, but their expressions were incredulous. They chose to laugh, assuming it was only fatigue, but Emily was aware of the danger. The realization that she could not trust anyone sent a shiver down her spine. She and her survival were surrounded by the sense of loneliness. As the night went on, instinct took over with every phone ring. The following call made her more anxious. The caller's tone had changed to one that was more mocking, as though they took pleasure in the pain they were creating. It validated her darkest suspicions. Despite the fact that a malicious force was observing her and taking advantage of her anxiety, she bravely chose to resist. She was resolved to resist the apparent fate. The phone abruptly rang again. Emily grabbed it up with her heart in her throat. In addition to her voice, there was now additional laughter in it. She was surrounded by distorted echoes and whispers. Her mind fought between reality and insanity. Could this whole thing have been a mob game invented by some extraterrestrial being? She was only beginning to understand the answer, and she quickly made the decision that she could not allow it to ruin her. In a desperate attempt to defend herself, she started to scream for assistance and reach out to her co-workers as the room's shadows seemed to close in. It all froze in that instant. After the laughter subsided and the noise seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, the voice came back more clearly than before, warning that the end was imminent and that there was nothing she could do. Emily, however, was unwilling to give up. and sought around for a way out in order to break the cycle. When she saw a knife glinting on the table, she snatched it in a panic because she knew her life was in danger and time was running out. But something inside of her ignited. If she could hurt her assailant, maybe she could alter her destiny. The person who was pursuing her must have been so close that she could feel its cold breath, so she lunged for the door without thinking. Emily was prepared to face her fear, but when she opened the door, she discovered the darkness she had been dreading. Shadows surrounded her, and the phone rang softly in the background, but this time she ignored it because she knew that in order to end the cycle, she needed to break free. So she entered the darkness with the knife and her resolve. Although fear tried to paralyze her, she felt stronger than ever and realized that she was not alone in this dark battle. Her courage and will to survive would become her best weapons in this dark battle. Finally, she faced the shadow that had been stalking her, and despite fear's attempts to paralyze her, she remembered her cries for help and the urgency of her situation with a heartbreaking scream. The echo of her own voice echoed in her mind as she ventured beyond the threshold. The atmosphere was cold, and she felt as though time had stopped. The only light guiding her was the flicker of her own resolve to fight. Lifting the knife, she rushed forward. Everything came to a halt in that instant. For a moment, she felt liberated as the sound of her scream echoed through the atmosphere. She was fighting for her own soul's redemption, not only for her life. A profound silence descended upon the room as the laughter subsided and the shadows started to disappear. Emily had discovered her actual strength when she made the decision to not let her future define her. She stood there now, having faced the unthinkable. The uncertainty was tremendous. Yet she had changed her fate, breathing heavily but with a fresh inner power. In addition to surviving that night, she had come to terms with her fear. But she was not going to be the same operator who had begun that day. She was the woman who defied fate and time, not just the voice on the other end of the line. Remember that you have a light within of you that has the power to alter your life's trajectory if you ever feel like fear is taking over. Now, the another story about old woman Ever. Wonder what sinister secrets could be concealed in the clothing we wear on a daily basis. Imagine a regular laundry worker discovering a number of filthy clothes that appear to be infused by the spirit of death during his nightly routine. I'm Carlos, and I'm going to tell you a story today that will alter your perspective on the world forever, particularly on the little things we tend to ignore, but that might actually hold unspeakable evils. This is the night washer's tale. At the laundry where I worked, it was just another typical night. Rather than being calming, the symphony of washing and drying machines started to make me uneasy. I recall that there was an odd chill in the air that was not caused by the weather. Something more was there, something that lurked in the darkness, slipping stealthily between the clothing lines. The usual features of the patrons characterized my routine, but one person consistently showed up at the same time each week, an elderly woman with deep-set eyes and a fragile demeanor, as though she was bearing the burden of years. Although she was well known in the community and went by Agnes, nobody was aware of the dread concealed behind her clothing. I had an unimaginable knot in my gut every time Agnes delivered her laundry. She was wearing clothes and blankets that had what appeared to be black, sinister stains on them. While sorting through the customers' clothes that evening, I saw something. The fabric was drenched in a rich red color, and I was driven to go closer and look at what was within. When I noticed that the stain appeared to create patterns that told stories of horrific murders, my heart began to accelerate. A faded white nightgown in particular had a particularly deep stain, as though the wearer had attempted to hold on to life and left their imprint in their last moments. At that point, my curiosity overcame my fear, and I made the decision to learn more. Every article of clothes Agnes brought had the same tragic mark, and an eerie bond developed between them as the days went by, only adding to the mystery. Every individual who had tragically died in our city was the subject of my inquiry. What began as a pastime became an obsession. Each object appeared to be a glimpse into a mob's history. The old woman who seemed so innocuous was connecting horror to my own life. And the more I read about her, the more fear rose in my veins. The atmosphere grew denser, as though a mist of misfortune hovered over the laundry, and I had chilling thoughts of ghosts and piercing screams. One evening, while the rain droned on the window, I made the decision to speak with Agnes. Unable to control myself, I approached her as we had a difficult talk while she was seated in her customary corner of the store, her shaking hands caressing the faded fabric of a blouse. When I first looked into her eyes and asked her about the stains, I noticed a glimpse of something dreadful there. "Every stain tells a story, young man," she murmured, her voice trembling in the laundry's stillness. "They are recollections of torture. I am the keeper of their secrets, and there are souls wandering this earth. The air grew heavy, the old woman appeared almost possessed. Her eyes grew aloof as though she could see past me, and I felt imprisoned. She then revealed the unthinkable. Each article of clothing she brought was a link to the soul of a person who had passed away tragically. She talked about how the clothes had the ability to reveal the reason for their deaths, how their spirit was imprisoned in those fragments, wailing for justice and remembering the idea that every dark stain symbolized a terrible incident or unresolved act of violence made me shudder. It was as though the city itself was infused with these terrible memories, and despite her frail look, Agnes was a crucial component of that cycle. The story kept repeating for weeks. Agnes brought her clothes, and I lost myself in her stories. Every article of clothing became a new horror story, but there was a shift in the air, a warning echoing in my head. Curiosity pulled at me like a crimson thread, keeping me tied to the unknown, even though I knew I should back off. I washed one of Agnes's shirts one evening when I sensed someone standing behind me. She was there observing me with her eerie eyes when I turned around. "Have you decided what you'll do yet?" Her words were weighted with significance that I could hardly understand, and she requested in a whisper. She felt as though the strands of fate were entwined around her, and she knew what was about to happen. That night, I couldn't help but feel unsafe. The rain was coming down harder, and the shop lights were flickering with a sinister gleam. Normally a place of safety, the laundry became a maze of terror as I washed. A heartbreaking cry reverberated in my head, and for a brief minute, I believed I could hear the cries of the dead. The air grew heavy and heavy. At that time, there was a tangible sense that someone or something was hiding. I realized that the seemingly innocuous old woman was not merely protecting the secrets of the dead. She was one of them, and that what had started out as curiosity had turned into a deadly trap. I felt like I was stabbed in the heart by that realization. I glanced around. The shadows moved purposefully. The clothes seemed alive. I was haunted by the resounding echo of Agnes's warning. Every article of apparel and every tale had a cost. The lights went out and the door banged shut as I struggled to get out. I sensed the pressure building in the shadows, as though the imprisoned spirits were attempting to escape, their frantic screams resonating for freedom. The laundromat, which used to be a source of comfort, seems to have changed into a battleground between the living and the dead. At last, a scream echoed through the room in the darkness. It was a manifestation of all the hushed spirits rather than something external. At that moment, I understood that the laundry was more than just a place of employment. It was a doorway to a world that had been concealed from sea. I could feel the agony of their stories consuming me at that very instant. I was caught in the web of Agnes, who had been the key, the link between the living and the dead. My final memory is of her smiling while the shadows moved around her, her face glowing faintly. Maybe I was the next to enter her enigmatic world, and she had been waiting. I will never forget the night the lengthy laundry attendant turned into a somber witness to the inexpressible. But I'm not sure if anyone else has been able to escape that nightmare, or if they will ever see the light again. If you like this story, please let me know by leaving a comment and a like. If you want to read more suspenseful horror stories, subscribe to the channel. Keep in mind that every item of clothing has a backstory, and occasionally there is more to it than meets the eye. Till the next occasion.